So, welcome everybody. Maybe it's a bit too loud. Is it okay like that? So, thank you very much for being here. We're very happy to present you our investigations, and we would be very happy to find maybe in the end something that we could do together finally. This is Justus and myself. We're working for CORRECTIV, the biggest non-profit newsroom in Germany. I am the climate and energy reporter, and Justus is my sympathetic boss who will present himself.
Thank you very much, Annika. My name is Justus von Daniels. I'm the editor-in-chief of CORRECTIV, and we both sit here because we were both working on the story. Yeah.
Yes, so the story is about the Gazprom lobby, and we did already some investigations about lobbyism, and probably you know that it's a bit difficult to get those articles really interesting because it's about networks and it's about showing them in a way that it's still interesting and not only name dropping of people who are lobbying for one purpose. So that was our aim, to show a little bit what is behind the German dependency on Russian gas. I think we get a problem. Maybe it's my computer. Okay, that was a problem. Yes, so what you can expect in the next hour is that we want to share with you how to investigate lobby structures systematically and how to make a plot out of an enormous amount of names and meetings and relations between powerful people. And what we did is, or what we aimed for, is to visualize those networks, because as I said, with a lobbying investigation, there's always the same problem, that you have a huge amount of information and names of people, and you have to present it in a way that's still interesting for all the readers without getting lost, as we mentioned on the paper. So that is what you will see, how we visualize these things, and also in the end, I mentioned it already, to find maybe new perspectives for investigating about lobbyism in Europe, which will probably be one of the biggest subjects in future, especially about climate change, for example, because there are big stakeholders who don't want to have the climate policies done. So I think this is really a future approach to work on lobbyism. Yes, I found it funny to put 3 photos of Schröder and Putin on the same page, because that is what probably most of the people in Europe, or maybe in the world, even know about the German-Russian connection. That there's a big friendship nearly between Schröder and Putin. So our chancellor, ex-chancellor Schröder, social democrat, who was deciding about a Nord Stream pipeline, for example, and which ended up our dependency in the fact that when the Russian war in the Ukraine began, we were dependent on 50% on Russian gas. That is enormous. You have to bear in mind that German still heat a lot with gas, for example, and of course a big German industry, chemical industry, for example, they depend enormously on gas as well for the production. So there was a strong tie to Russia when the war began. And what we wanted to know is to look a bit behind those pictures, so not only to see, okay, this is Schröder and this is Putin, but there must be a lot more people, a lot more networks, a lot more strategies behind it, that we have been run into this dangerous situation. So, because I think it's quite enormous. I mean, Germany as a big business partner and everything, we would have had the choice probably to import other industries, or to more depend on solar or wind power, for example. It would have been an option, but we took this bad option in the end. So that's why we were interested in looking a little bit behind the scenes of these this fact. So yeah, this is just one more point that probably all of us know, or that was obvious in Germany. But for example, Gazprom is sponsor of Schalke 04, so the football club. Every German knows it, or you have seen it on the shirt. So that was quite an obvious link. And of course, Schröder, who was really just after he resigned from being chancellor, or he's not being elected again, he became member of the board of Rosneft and Nord Stream. So probably one of the biggest jobs you could have had in Russia. And of course, there was a Nord Stream 2 climate foundation, which was really financed by Russia, and that was just a strategy not to obey to the American sanctions, to the Nord Stream pipeline. So that were the 3 points that were probably obvious to most of at least politically interested people. But we thought, okay, there must be a lot more, and that was our investigation about that. Justus will talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about investigating lobby activities, I think there's common strategies if you're a journalist how to do it. Normally, it's like you look how many contacts lobbying groups have to politicians, and you look it up to the parliaments, so how many times a lobbyist maybe meets a politician. Or you just compare law proposals, to lobbying papers. So these are the usual ways normally how to find the direct influence of lobbying activities to politics. But as you mentioned, in the last years, because the Schröder connection to Russia was so apparent in Germany, there were always like various articles in the last 10 years, I would say, always articles about some people who were part of these lobbying activities, about some arcane organizations which lobbied for more gas from Russia to Germany. But these were only like loose pieces which were floating around. And what we actually saw, that if you would put these puzzle pieces together, you would see maybe a remarkable network that reached out in various ways to where the power is. So it was, for a long time, it was the Social Democrats which were in power, that was apparent. But in our investigation, by looking at these organizations, we saw, of course, this went on to, also to the Christian Democrats, the other big party in Germany, where Gazprom reached out to the federal states where they were in power, and in these federal states where the business interests to Russian gas ties were very close. So what we did is we tried to kind of look at these articles which were published, look at kind of all kind of publicly available information, because there was a lot out there, and it was only about to collect them and to look a little bit closer to find out about these kind of structures, connections, which were kind of sponsoring activities by Gazprom, or which were organizations kind of organized or funded by Gazprom, or organizations where people were in it who were working for Russian interests. And which was a kind of a fun fact, which is not so much fun in the terms of fun in the real sense, but for investigative journalists, we have these fun moments. For example, that we found like a lot of organizations who had like similar names, which you cannot really kind of draw them apart. So you had in Germany, you had organizations which were called the German-Russian Raw Materials Conference. You had an organization which was called the German-Russian Forum, the German-Russian Future Forum, the German-Russian Raw Materials Forum. Yeah, so they all kind of that was a nice, you can see that there's a kind of strategy, all kind of different organizations, different foundations, taking place at different locations. But they all had something in common. They were all kind of trying to support gas supply from Russia. And if we say gas supply from Russia, we mean Gazprom, because Gazprom is the half state-owned Russian company who's actually exporting the gas to Germany or to other places in Europe. And if you looked at these organizations, they were kind of funded or owned or by similar persons. And these persons most of them were Germans. Like you have like German managers, energy managers, you had like lawyers who were not very known people. So like, you know, like normal people who were not publicly known, but they had some influence. And you can see that these organizations were kind of funded in places, like as I said before, where the Russian business was very active. So what we found, for example, was something you can see it a little bit maybe here. So this was kind of our graphic design, how we kind of try to display our findings. That we saw these organizations which were very much active in the federal state of Saxony. Nobody was looking at Saxony. Everybody was looking at the northern state of Mecklenburg-Pomerania. That's the state where Nord Stream 2 was built. So the connection from Russia to Germany from the both Nord Stream pipelines were in Pomerania. But nobody was looking really at Saxony. Why was Saxony so important for the Russians? Because in Saxony there's one company which nobody really knows. It's called VNG. It's a gas supply company which had always close ties to Russian gas supply. And in these forums, there were always invitations to politicians from the CDU. The CDU is still the party in power in Saxony. So you can see a lot of people from the CDU had close ties to these organizations which were really dedicated to the country of Saxony. And these organizations were in turn often founded or funded or organized by this arcane company which is called VNG. A similar graphic looks very similar, but this is now the organizations which are taking place in northern Pomerania. Similar names, different organizations, but similar people again. And what you can see here is, I cannot really point it, but I will show you this guy. So these are politicians which are more or less known in Germany, like Manuela Schwesig. She was is still the prime minister in this federal state. She was also like responsible for putting up this climate foundation, which you were kind of mentioning, the climate foundation, which was only there to circumvent American sanctions, you know, like kind of a partner country. But this was how they were doing. But there was one guy who's called Falk Tischendorf. He's a lawyer. He's a German lawyer based in Moscow. But he was also part in the Saxony network. And there were other people we kind of who popped up in our investigation, which were here and were there. And we didn't really know who they were. But they were very active. And they were very active in assembling politicians to who were just in power. So we had these two networks. Then we created a third network, which we called the SPD connections. The SPD was a very important part of the close ties to Russian gas supply. And what we found out is kind of the obvious. So it was always known 2 or 3 SPD politicians, like former Chancellor Schröder, was very active in promoting the interests of Rosneft and of Gazprom. But there were other guys. And what we see here is an interesting thing. So this is another guy, Hanno Wiese. He's an SPD politician. Nobody really knows him. But he used to be, how do you call this, a consul, a Russian consul for Germany. So he was named a consul for Russia to Germany. And he also had ties to northern Pomerania to Saxony, and he was very, very well connected to in the SPD. And you also see this guy, this is Sigmar Gabriel. He is the former economic minister. And he was, for example, and we kind of looked at what they did in these organizations. So he held speeches, and he was very present at these organizational events. And when he was economic minister in 2015, he did something very strange. He sold the gas storage of Germany to Gazprom. And nobody really knew, no, he didn't sell it because it was a private company. So it was a private company who actually asked for permission to sell the gas storage, and he had to give the permission. And it was, and his office was very keen to give this permission. So there was no real discussions, there was not real public debate. Nobody really knew about it. And nobody wondered, but actually Germany sold not only the, or was only taking the gas, but it sold the gas storage, which was a very heavy problem last year. So just to wrap that up, what we did is, okay, I go back for once. When we did this, as a journalist, we always have problems if you're doing this kind of lobbying thing, because you collect hundreds of information, people, organizations, different places, and as Annika mentioned, you can write a long article which nobody really is interested in, and so what we try to do is we kind of turned around our normal view on writing a story. We started with the visualizations. Yeah? We said, okay, what can we display on a visualization? How many organizations, how many people? And our designer always said, you know, like if you take more than 4 people, that's enough. People, readers don't pay attention to these people. Readers don't pay attention to all these kind of different organizations. Make it as simple as possible. So we had, like, in the end, we had 3 graphics. The ones I showed it to you. And these graphics were our base, kind of, to create a text or to create an article. So we were kind of trying not to mention too many names, not to mention too many of these organizations, but our sentence was always, you know, there were organizations who had similar names, but not to talk about all these organizations. And that was kind of a nice, smart move, which was really, yeah, more or less done by our designers also, to kind of restrict us on how to write a story and how to make this a little bit more handy to read, handy to digest, and also to create a debate around these lobby activities, which I think we wouldn't have created if we would have written this kind of arcane article of thousands of people. So this is what we did, which was called the Gazprom story, and we will tell you later how this was received and how this developed, but we had a kind of a follow-up which had a different view or a different perspective.
Yes, so this just came out today in English, so I invite you very much to go on our website, because this is a juicy story that we could do as a follow-up, because there were some people who were contacting us about after our first publication of the Gazprom lobby, and they said, yeah, I have attended to a very strange lobby festival in a way, which was just said the Young Leaders Conferences between Russia and Germany, and they said they felt so strange on these parties because it was like propaganda, and it was really like, I mean, you see on our picture, what you see is the reality. It looks very strange, but it was as strange as it looks, because there were magicians with white rabbits, and there were Bavarian musicians who flew in to attend to these parties. They went to on the top of the mountains to have a champagne party, and it was all loads of money were spent on these parties that were designed for young leaders, so the new coming up people, if you want to put it like that, because they haven't been that new, but it was the next generation of powerful people, maybe, if you want to put it like that. And they have been invited to Russia and to Germany for more than 10 years. Every year there was one of these big conferences. It was called conferences, but those people told us it was more or less just big drunk party, and nothing really that they were discussing really. And so again, we looked at the people that attended to these parties and that hold speeches on these parties, and that were in a way then responsible for a good ambience for Russian investments. So again, there's Olaf Scholz, for example, so our actual chancellor now, who invited those German-Russian party to his place, which was Hamburg in 2014. So just after the invasion of the Crimea, he invited this party to happen in his town, for example. And again, there's Heino Wiese that mentioned Justus, and other people from other powerful people from Russia. So we found it's like, I mean, there are many young leaders conferences in the world. I mean, there are some in German-French context or German-American young leaders conferences. There are loads of them, but when we compared them, we found out that none of them was so luxurious and with so much money that were going on these 2 or 3 days in luxurious hotels and champagne and lobster and everything that you can imagine, to spend loads of money in 2 or 3 days. That happened there to continue those strong ties between Germany and Russia. And you got the sponsoring. So by coincidence, it was the same sponsor then for our journalism festival, the McKinsey company, among others. So there was also Gazprom again, of course, who had not only was a sponsor, but also sent dozens of people to these conferences, as well as the McKinsey company, who sent more than 28, 30 people. So that was one of our aims as well, to really have the numbers of people they sent, to see, okay, this is not a neutral conference between students who just want to join and talk about whatever. No, this was really a strategic event where big companies, as Metro as well, for example, or VNG, so the big gas supplier, they send their people, they send their manager. So this was an important event for them. Porsche as well sent people and provided Porsche cars as well to to get the people to the parties. And we saw as well that it's not by coincidence probably that still now Metro is one of the companies that is still very present in Russia. One of the few left who say, you know, we will continue to work with Russia as we did before. So they, until now, they are still present, and they keep their shops and all their economics open in Russia still nowadays. So yeah, we get a little bit of same approach to get the consensus, or how you say, the concentration, or to see what was really happening on these parties, because we have these people talking to us. But we as well, we had some possibility to check out the participants list. That was a bit of a long work to count the people who were really there, to be able to prove in the end that was not a neutral event, but really something strategically organized from the beginning on, with again Gazprom in the backhand for the money and organization. So yeah, so we had different reaction on especially the first publication, because the other one is still quite recent.
Yeah, the interesting thing was, I mean, what we actually showed is these kind of underlying structures now, and of course these are it's kind of a soft approach to an investigation, because in the end you cannot say X led to Z, but you could see why, especially in Germany, but in other countries as well, maybe we come to that later, there was no really political debate. There was no hesitancy. No powerful party didn't ever think about that we actually raised our kind of gas dependency from Russia from 30 to 55% in the end. And the reactions after our publication was quite interestingly heavy. That the former Vice Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel, he was really angry at what we published. So we thought maybe we did something right. So he filed a case against us, and he just found one half sentence in our story, which was, I think, maybe from his perspective questionable, because we said he was in different occasions of these conferences, he was holding speeches saying we want to lift sanctions. Please lift sanctions. He started to say that in 2014, in the year when the Crimea crisis was there, and he repeated in 2015, and he repeated that until 2016, a German economic minister at the time. And he said, he didn't ever say he wanted to lift sanctions, but he wanted to lift sanctions under certain circumstances. And there was a court case, which is still pending. So we are still in fight with him. So that was a kind of interesting reaction. We got a lot of people who actually wrote to us, who were kind of part of these organizations, as you said, in these conferences, but also like part of McKinsey and part of other companies who were kind of involved in the Russian-German business. And many offered themselves as sources for further stories. That was interesting. And the other thing which struck us was that we were kind of very quickly invited to the European Parliament to speak. There's one. It's interestingly, what's it's called? There's the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in All Democratic Processes in the European Union. So that's a committee of the European Parliament with a complicated title. But what they actually asked us, they asked to come to Brussels and to talk about our findings. And so we did this to give some information, and the politicians who were there from all different parties kind of encouraged journalism, not only us, but it was kind of an encouragement for journalism, saying, please do more, because we need more knowledge about all these hidden, arcane structures which were in place in the last 10 years. And they said, okay, it's interesting that you did it in Germany, but maybe there are other countries where you can see these kind of interesting lobbying structures, for example, in Austria, or for example in Italy, which is heavily dependent on, or used to be heavily dependent on the gas. So just to give you a small idea, so there's a lot of numbers which you don't really have to digest now, but it's just to show that there are some countries in Europe which were actually dependent, not as heavily as Germany, but still. And the idea from other European politicians, but also like people we talked to in other countries, was why not doing this kind of investigation in other countries as well? Because a company like Gazprom, half owned by the Russian state, and the Russian state knows how to kind of not only infiltrate, but also influence policies in a very, very arcane ways. If you would do this in other countries, this would actually enlarge the whole picture just to see in retrospect now, like how dependency was created. So that was one thing we didn't really manage to do, to team up with other journalists in other countries, but I think it's still an open, it's still an opportunity.
Yes, because what was interesting for us as well is to convince ourselves of the importance of the story, because in the beginning we thought, okay, it is known that there was lobbyism, what could be new about it, but we saw in the reactions of the readers as well that for them it was a completely new picture. If you put it all together, all the different kind of conferences, lobbyism, lobbyists, with the graphs as well, then it makes a difference. So if you think, okay, it is known that the automobile industry, for example, is heavily lobbying in Brussels, okay, but if you put it all together, probably the picture would be different or really interesting again, even if most part of it might be known. So that's what we sort of as one conclusion as well of this investigation, because we were positively surprised about the reactions of our readers, because in the end we thought, is this really enough? Does it really give something new to the readers? Because I mean, you know it as well. After some months, everything seems to you so common that finally you don't you can't measure the impact that you can have. And especially with this story, there were so many positive reactions that people say, okay, for once I understand what's really behind the not really understandable political decisions in Germany. So I'm sure that there are loads of other political fields that could be approached in the same way, and especially from different countries. For example, I don't know, the chemical industry will be playing a heavily role in groundwater difficulties in future with the climate crisis, for example, or many other subjects could be targeted from journalists in different European or worldwide countries. Why not? If we talk about lobbyism, because loads of the decisions are taken in Brussels nowadays. So yeah, that's what we hope for, to get in discussion with you about this. But of course, any other question is welcome as well about the investigation that we did. Thank you so far.
Yeah, so please.
Is there a micro?
Yeah, mic.
Oh, there it is.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. You've obviously done a fantastic job in networking the connections between these groups of people. How far did you get into looking at the flows of ideas and content and intellectual influence? I mean, I guess that there are speeches at these conferences and these events in which German politicians would have stood up and said particular things about the genius of the Russian spirit, and to what extent did those might have echoed official propaganda, for example, would be an interesting question. And I suppose the second question would be, connected to this, is what other kinds of influence mapping do you think would be useful in the German context, like now? That's not about Gazprom, but it's about other organizations, maybe organizations connected to the AfD or other things, I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe for the first question. So yes, it was really. It is actually very interesting if you see who's appearing at these conferences, and for example, just count the numbers. How many times did they appear, and how many times did they give a speech or were part of a panel talk? And these hidden organizations that was interesting, because if you confront them with your findings, they will always say, no, we didn't. We have some cultural. So our approach is a cultural one. We want to have close ties with German-Russian relationships. We have very generally, we do something about education. There was an organization which was called the Ost-Institut, the East Institute, which sounded a little bit like academic, and they had a professor in the board of trustees, whatever. But the topics, if you look at the speeches, if you look at the panels, it was all about energy. And nobody was really kind of questioning this. And there was kind of no wonder. So maybe what we didn't find, because maybe we didn't dig too deep into that, we didn't find like speeches which were then used to political speeches in the parliament to make an argument for, I don't know, selling the gas storage in Germany. But there was no questioning of this kind of policy of being positive towards Russian energy. And you can always discuss, that a certain amount of energy comes from all kinds of different places, and most of them are autocratic regimes. So this is not something what we want to discuss, but we want to discuss the dependency, and you can draw a line of non-debate, yeah, non-debate of the arguments. So that was interesting for us to see.
And the narration as well, because there was one phrase that we heard from many of our people we talked to, yes, Russia will always deliver. So there was one claim that the German politicians always say, yeah, whatever happens, they will always deliver. So no matter what they are doing in Ukraine or wherever, they will deliver the gas, and so we're fine. And so the Young Leaders Conference, our newest publication, there were some very strange, even though everything was about energy, as Justus said, but there were some very strange discussions as well, for example, about freedom of artists in Russia. And there was this incredible phrase like, yeah, a threatened artist is probably more creative, or things like that. That was said publicly, and it was published as well afterwards in the conference report. So things that you can't imagine really. And it was, for example, was the Julian Reichelt was on this panel. So the ex editor-in-chief of the Bild newspaper in Germany. So very powerful people, of course, attended to this panel. It's not, we don't know who said this phrase, probably not him, but there was a proper narration, always same like, okay, Russia is reliable and they will always deliver, and there were some kind of completely, crazy phrases that you wouldn't imagine can be said on a public panel.
And coming to maybe to the second point, like other lobbying activities or things, I think this is the real interesting stuff, is that normally even we as media are quite kind of satisfied if we have like one guy who is responsible for everything, you know, like Chancellor Schröder, he's delivering the gas and he's a bad guy. And that's always a nice, juicy story to tell, and you know, and it's kind of also like freeing everyone else, because everyone else, and especially the business side, is saying, you know, we take their hands off and say, you know, we are not responsible. But once you are looking into these kind of second tier of people, you realize there's a very, very strong group of people who are supporting it all the time. And you see like the usual people who are like representing business interests, but you also see like this guy Falk Tischendorf we mentioned before. We still don't know his ties with Russia, yeah, and I wouldn't, you know, we cannot really say that he was, you know, part of the Russian regime or he was acting for the Russian regime or whatever. But he's a German lawyer working in Moscow. He never said what he's really doing, but he's very often in Germany, and so you kind of bring these people to light, and these are shadow people, so they don't like the light. And they were all kind of very angry when we confronted them. So many of them didn't answer at all. Many of them said we are totally on the wrong side, and we kind of paid by other people as well. So they were kind of very aggressive. And if they don't have anything to hide, you know, why are they so aggressive? And I mean, you mentioned the AfD, other organizations which, you know, you can also like question, you know, which ties to other countries they have. This is exactly the kind of investigation we find interesting, you know, to look at these second-tier people, and especially in the AfD, we did some research as well. You see many people which are sitting on the bench in the parliament way back, nobody knows them, but these are the people who are traveling to Russia all the time, for example, or who are like election watchdogs for Russia and Azerbaijan or whatever. And I think that's why it's so interesting to take these perspective, to dig out something which is publicly available, but nobody is really looking at it. Yeah. Other questions over there?
Do you ever reach out to people in Russia to have?
So you have to.
Thanks. Hello. Did you ever reach out to people in Russia to kind of find out what these businessmen were doing, what their connections were on the ground? Because that's also another part of the story. And I mean, lobbying isn't illegal. Did you find any transfer of funds? Because that's the underlying question, of course. Lavish parties aren't illegal, but you know, some other things might be happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, we know, for example, that McKinsey, sorry to mention them again, they had a big deal with Russia, about 50 million. At that time, especially when they get into touch with young leaders conferences, and as I mentioned, Metro, for example, as well, they got super connections and still a big profit in Russia, whereas others went away since the war. And all the conferences, I mean, it wasn't possible to see really the direct money flow into these, despite the Young Leaders Conferences, so the last publications where they were sponsored by Gazprom and others, McKinsey and Metro. And so it was not possible to see this, but we could see that there was this climate foundation, for example, for Manuela Schwesig, who was about 20 million that should have been, I mean, they claimed that would be invested into naturalization or ecological projects or whatever. So that went directly into the land, and they sponsored also a music festival. So it was probably not big wallet that were or big big envelopes of money given to them directly, or at least we don't know yet. But it was more about funding everything a little bit, so that worked pretty well, I think.
And yeah, the question to the reaching out to the Russians. Yeah, I mean, we contacted some people, especially in the context of the Young Leaders Conferences, but they didn't respond. And of course, it would be much more interesting to team up with, journalists who are who know much more about Russia, because they are working not in Russia, obviously, but about the country. We didn't do that so far because that was just an overstretch of our capacities. But that's exactly what we want to also to encourage. Not that we are the ones who are doing all that stuff, but think about. Connecting to people in other countries who might do similar things and to team up, because that's what you see in these kind of European collaborations. The good thing about it, I mean, there's a lot of bad things about it, because on the practical level, there's a lot of hustle to work together, but the good things about it is that you find the similar structures in different countries, and you connect these dots, and eventually you can do the kind of the reverse work what the companies are doing. They are kind of disseminating their influence in all these countries, and they hope that nobody is really finding out and connecting these dots. And that's exactly what I think is so important, that you work together. And yeah, that's why your question is exactly the right one. And in our case, we must say that we couldn't actually invest enough resources to do the same thing with the Russian side as well. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
So to come to the legality issue, I wonder, I mean, it seems that lobbying might per se be legal, right? But they're listening to so many political connections with individual politicians. I wonder whether sometimes it was possible that the line of legality was crossed, meaning corruption or, political influence, or perhaps, if it is illegal in Germany, I don't know, political party funding in elections, European or German or federal or state. So I wonder, were you able to follow the money? I mean, in these strategic networks, and find out of legal persons, political parties being influenced? And if so, what do the state attorneys or constitutional courts or parliaments say about it? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, we know that there have been some funding for the VNG, for example, so this gas supplier, and the Social Democrats as well. They received some money, but for now there isn't anything illegal about it. That is at least nothing obvious.
Yeah, they funneled it in ways that cannot be said to be illegal in a German context. I mean, we saw, for example, there was a party financing from one of these guys. He's a party member of the SPD, And when and he was actually channeling a lot of money, or actually donating a lot of money to his own party. And he was actually the Russian consul. So it's really hard to track back where this money came from, but you cannot do anything legally about it. And there's one other example. It's a little bit beside the point of this investigation, but we also did another investigation on legal and illegal party financing on the far right German party AfD, which is one of the big right-wing party family in Europe. And we found that there was a huge illegal funding from a guy who's based in Switzerland, a German. And this person, a few years before, was commissioned to buy houses or properties in London for some Russians. So, did he actually funnel money? I don't know, but he's a rich man, so he can do it on his own. He's a German, but he did it in Switzerland. So there's a lot of these arcane, strange things, and that's exactly what I think is the task of all of us, I guess, in a way, to find out about, because these people are smart. They don't have to do it illegally. That's what we think. And that's why we try to make transparent all these legal ways, which put a lot of influence and also pressure to politicians. So maybe we are entering a new phase of how lobbying is being done. So this kind of, I mean, that's what you would like to have, is like this nice corruption case, which you can make a big story out of it. And
yes,
would be
we would have loved to as well.
Yeah, there's some things to be done. But I think that's equally important to show, maybe it's working in a different way. Yeah. Other questions or remarks in the last 2 minutes, we see. So then there's only some encouragement, and that's what we would like to do, is that as CORRECTIV, as we as a non-profit newsroom, we are working also like internationally with networks, locally and internationally. And if you feel that you would like to do some on this topic, I think there's always an easy way to contact us. But also, what we want to encourage is even to think about this international dimension, and to maybe what would be kind of nice if we could actually, or if you could expand the same kind of investigation to other countries, or actually trying to do this, what you mentioned before, working on the European level, which is becoming more and more important. I mean, we're not talking only about gas from Russia, but we're talking about lobbying structures. And I think it gets so important to put these dots together, where different companies through different countries work, for example, in Brussels. And we are always very narrow-minded, in most cases look at our companies in our state, and trying to find lobby influences in Brussels. But and
that's why we are more weak than the industry, because they are very strong together on the European level. They always work together.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what they do, and I think that's what we have to do as journalists. Not copying the same ways, but following the path they are actually doing. Yeah.
And what you could also do, just one more comment, is if you want, I mean, one of our ideas of CORRECTIV was Steal Our Story. And with this one, the Gazprom lobby, for example, Mediapart just translated into French and put it on their website. So if ever you want to do this, you're very welcome as well.
So thank you very much. And hope to see you in the next days at the festival. Yeah, thanks.